our next webinar, AMA, panel discussion, whatever you want to call it. It's going to take a couple of seconds, as always, because I'm restreaming out onto LinkedIn Live. So just give me a couple of seconds to refresh, make sure that all of our connections are going. Let's see, it looks like we're live on Facebook, YouTube, Periscope, Twitter, and I'm refreshing on LinkedIn. Miss Tina is in the background as always. Tina, do you see us on LinkedIn yet?
Not just yet. It takes a second and it'll let me know. I'll let you know when it comes through.
Great, thanks. So I'm super excited for this session today. While we wait for that to connect up, shouldn't take very long. We are going to be talking about one of the biggest nightmares inside of the procurement and sourcing process, which is actually the beginning of the whole damn thing, which is around requests and approvals. And in an off moment for Mike Cadieux, I mentioned something about the fact that requests and approvals was like chewing glass. And my new friends from Zip picked up on that right away and said that is going to be the topic of discussion for our first webinar together. So super excited about that. Really, really happy to have some guests on today with some of the leading cutting edge technology companies out there in existence today. Thank you for everybody who's coming in. I'm going to do a quick little housekeeping before I introduce Liem, Rujul, and Chantal. And just a couple of quick housekeeping moments. So we have a Zoom room, as everybody knows. We've got people inside of the Zoom room. If you're going to be inside of the Zoom room, please feel free to chat, say hello, tell us where you're from, all those wonderful things. If you have questions inside of the live studio audience, inside of the chat room, please use the Q&A. We're also going to be monitoring the LinkedIn Live. So if you are on the LinkedIn Live, which I have to refresh my screen because I still haven't done that yet. If you are on the LinkedIn Live feed, you probably have 15 to 35 people on the LinkedIn Live. We're going to be monitoring that chat as well. I typically ask polling questions. Hi, everybody. The polling questions, feel free to just blast your numbers into the chat. I am going to ask you about your maturity model on this. I probably am going to ask a couple of questions. I'd love to get audience feedback on these things, as you all know, because you've probably already seen the Mike Cadieux show before. So anyway, without further ado, let me introduce you to Chantal from, oh, sorry, hold on one second. I got one more screen I need to open. There we go. So let me introduce you to the audience, to the group for today. Rujul, the founder and CEO of Zip. You may not have heard of Zip yet. They're just coming onto the scene. Amazing new company with some brand new technology. They've been in stealth mode up until recently. We found out about Procurement Foundry. They started getting a lot of hype and chatter inside of the community, and since then it's been off to the races. And they now are one of our newest sponsors at Procurement Foundry. So thank Rujul for that. Really appreciate you being here with us today. Excited to talk to you about requests and approvals and how you're chewing that up.
No, thanks for having all of us. Couldn't be more excited.
Great. Chantal Plank. I'm not saying that right, Chantal? Chantal's from Canva. She's the procurement operations lead. Liem Hau, he's head of strategic sourcing for Hopin. Two companies that I think are amazing at what you do. Why don't we do this? Let's quickly just go around the horn. Ladies first, obviously. Chantal, tell us a little bit about yourself. Tell us about your background. Tell us about what you do over at Canva. We'd love to hear it.
Yeah, so I'm the procurement operations lead here at Canva. A little bit more broad. Operations across finance, even in our whole source to pay platform. Really, my focus is optimizing how our teams work together and helping to implement systems that are really going to scale with Canva. Canva is a very fast growing company. We're currently 1,500 plus employees, but just with exponential growth. So we really need to look at, all of what works for us as a startup isn't going to scale with us. And how do we look at that from a procurement perspective and build for the future instead of maybe what procurement has been in the past. So some of my past experiences have been particularly around operations. I used to work for Procore Technologies as well. And so what motivates me and what I get excited about is building for the future and scaling a company, particularly a company like Canva, from a procurement and an operations perspective. And just that future. I think there's always more to be built, but how do we look at that and say, this is what we need, and here's how we're going to get there?
Wow, That's great. I love the idea of building for the future. That's awesome. It's almost entrepreneurial in nature, right?
Very
Um,
much.
Great. Liam, how about yourself? Tell us a little bit about yourself. Tell us a little bit about what you do, where you're at, and what you focus on.
Hey everybody, this is Liam. So I lead strategic sourcing for Hopin, which is a new hot virtual events company. My role here is the source to contract process. So I have a little bit of the procurement side on the downstream side, but I'm mostly focused on source to contract. Given sort of the where we are in the journey as a company, my role is focused on building the team, building the processes, and similarly making sure that they're scalable at the end of the day to sort of, bend where we need to bend, flex where we need to flex, and ultimately sort of constrain spend where we need to constrain it, or let it loose where we want it to let it loose on the upstream side. And then the hope and dream is that on the downstream side, all the procure to pay and the accounting people get what they need at the end of the day when it comes downstream.
Yeah, sweet. Thank you very much for being here, by the way. Really appreciate you taking the time out to be with us. Rujul, tell us a little bit about yourself, a little bit about your background, and about Zip, if you can.
Yeah, of course. I'll share more backstory on how we got started. So I'm Rujul, co-founder and CEO at Zip. Quick personal backstory. So Zip is company number 2 for me. Before this, I was the co-founder and CEO of a totally unrelated company called Flight Car. So we would give you free airport parking by renting out your car to someone else, fully insured. And I actually dropped out of college, late 12, early 13 to start that company. Ran the company for about 4 years. We grew to about 200 people and then ended up doing a sale to Mercedes-Benz in the middle of 2016. And then living in San Francisco, I figured I should go work at like a real tech company. And so of course, went to go work for Airbnb for nearly 3 years. And when I was at Airbnb, while I worked in product management, I interfaced a ton with my counterparts in procurement and in sourcing. And what I got to see was this real pain point around, first of all, as an end user in the business, right? I want to buy something material, I have a need. Where do I go to initiate that request? And then how does that get tracked across procurement and sourcing, legal, data security, IT, risk, privacy, right? All of these different stakeholders before something finally makes its way into some other system as a PR and then sort of gets rubber stamped all the way into a fully approved purchase order. Everything before that was just so manual. And so that was ultimately the inspiration for my co-founder Lou and I to leave and start Zip early last year, focused on really what I would call the intake to procure part of the life cycle, really the upstream sort of parts of procurement based on a lot of the pain points that we felt and that we saw.
Intake to procure, huh? I like that. I don't know if I've ever heard of it called intake, but I like it. I've been doing this about,
yeah, it's definitely new.
I've been doing this about 22 years, probably older than just a real long time, man. And I don't think I've ever heard it called intake. I might need to borrow that from you. That's pretty cool. It's a new word. We're gonna have to start pushing that. So listen, thanks for the background. Just tell us a little bit about Zip, a little bit about what you focused on, what the technology is. I want to get into process automation associated with requests and approvals, but just tell us a quick little bit about what you're building at Zip.
Yeah, of course. So Zip is really born from 2 fundamental sort of changes in the world today, right? One, I think there's a lot more decentralized initiation of purchasing and procurement required today than really ever before. And then the second is that there's a lot more what I would almost call lateral approvals, right? Across data security, across legal, IT, all these core, even the budget owners often decentralized now, just a lot more lateral sort of approvals and reviews than ever before, right? It certainly wasn't the case that way in a more traditional manufacturing setting, for example. And so because of those 2 things, the front end, the upstream parts of procurement become more important. And so really what Zip does is provide one front door for any employee at the organization that needs something with no training required through Slack or wherever, very intuitively kick off the request and then answer only the right questions that they need to answer, right? Whether they're buying software, they want to hire a contractor, whatever it is. And then based on how they answer, sort of give them a very crisp visual flow of here's what's serial and here's what's parallel across procurement and finance and legal and IT and all these core teams before something makes its way into the ERP or P2P system on the back end as a draft PO or as a PR. So that's really the core part of Zip. And the other thing we've done is to make everything no code config, because it's just, a lot of old school systems out there take, 6, 12, even 18 months, right, to implement with tons and tons of IT effort. And that just doesn't make sense in 2021 anymore for a lot of these use cases. So procurement is enabled to and empowered to, make the changes that they want to make directly in the system with no code.
That's pretty wild, man. The concept of using a no-code solution, because procurement people don't tend to be coders, let's be honest. The concept of using a no-code solution to solve the rapidly expanding concept of lateral approvals, that's another thing I haven't heard before that I'm going to definitely steal from you, is lateral approvals. I think, and I know when we first did the run through, Liam was talking about, now you got to go to the chief information security officer on a lot of things. You got to go to a whole bunch of other people to get approvals and things like that, while you're going through the more traditional process of, oh my God, I got to go through a negotiation. I got to get buy-off from my stakeholder. I got to do that. In a lot of cases, there's financial approvals and secondary approvals, things like that. So I love the concept of lateral approvals and using no code solution to almost parallel effort it. So let's jump in, man. And I want to go back to chewing glass, because for me, requests and approvals has been chewing glass. And I'm going to stop for a second. I want everybody that's watching, everybody in the in-room, everybody that's on LinkedIn, first Mike Cadieux poll of the day, on a scale of 1 to 5, I want everybody to tell me where you think your maturity level is at associated with your request and approval processes. 1 being, it comes at us on cocktail napkins. We don't even know about half of it. I find out when AP calls me and says, where's the PO for this thing? And 5, I'm fully plugged into the matrix. I got carve outs, I got pop outs, FP&A approval. Everybody's watching what's going on, and we know where all of our spend is at any given time. So everybody on LinkedIn, everybody inside of the room, give me a 1 to 5 really quickly on the chat and on the feed, so I know where everybody's at while I'm starting this off. But let's talk about, why is getting requests and approvals figured out so much of a nightmare? I don't know if it's the systems. I don't know if all the different systems that everybody's bought that we're trying to glue together. I don't know if it's the fact that now I have to educate everybody on all of these systems that I've bought. And I don't know whether or not it's just the overall bureaucracy that we've piped into the process over the years. But it seems like getting a request in the right fashion and then getting it through to an approval is just it's like chewing glass. That's what it is. So I'm interested. Why don't we start with you, Liam? Tell me a little bit about your thoughts on why is this so difficult?
I think it's a few things for me, right? I mean, I think the first point is a lot of people always think about approvals living within the procure to pay process. So if you think about approvals living within procure to pay and nowhere else, then you're talking about P2P systems and their flexibility or inflexibility around where you can put people in the approval process, right?
Yep.
Whether it's parallel or whether it's sequential, or whether you can add this functional group or that functional group. But then you're still limited to simply approval versus another workflow that you might have to inject yourself into, right? And so like security, for example, is an entirely different workflow that you have to inject into versus a purely just I approve. So I think there's one sense there. The other sense is that, approvals have always existed before the P2P process, right? And so those approvals have always existed in different forms or fashions from company to company. So you could take, for example, CapEx process. How do we spend money on CapEx, right? Might be a whole different sort of finance sort of approval process around that. How do we approve headcount? How do we approve contractors? Lots of just informal emails between managers and people saying yes or no, or HR people. So there's a lot of approvals that are just out there that have never been captured into one workflow, or they exist in different workflows. And then increasingly year after year, somebody else has an opinion about a third-party vendor, right? Whether it be legal, security, or 5 different people in legal. And those people are always saying, why didn't you ask me before we signed this contract, right? And you're like, well, I didn't know I was supposed to ask you, right? And so every year it seems to be somebody new that wants to inject themselves because of some risk or some new rule or new law. And so when you think about P2P on sort of the rigid nature of approvals, something like Zip does two things. One is it gives sourcing people who work on the upstream fashion on getting those approvals, and we've always done them manually. It automates that for us. And then it also makes it very flexible for someone like me and say, oh, Joe just started at the company. He's got a new role. He cares about X, and we want to input him into the workflow as well. Good partner, everything, give him a heads up. Even if it's a heads up, it makes it very easy for us to do that in an automated way without, again, having to get someone from IT or the vendor to configure or code something for us.
Yeah, I think that's really smart. I love where you touch on that, which is the different types of approvals and the different types of requests that come through. I mean, there's 100 different variables to that. And it seems to me that I know in the past when designing approval processes, I have more variations than I actually have the original. I might have one approval process, but I get 37 different variations of that to go outside of it. And it's always been a nightmare to try and manage all of those. Because somebody somewhere comes along and says, no, wait, this is an HR related request. The chief human HR person needs to look at it. Chantal, same question for you. Why is this such a nightmare in your opinion?
Yeah, I would double tap on just the different request types, right? Like right now, different request types, which means you've got different intakes. You know, for example, on our side at Canva, we had over 8 forms, 81 different fields within those forms, which were mostly duplicate fields, right? So you're entering the same information across but this one needs to go to this team, this one needs to go to this team. So you're duplicating a lot of efforts. And then when we talk about approvals from that perspective, everything's decentralized. There's no, I think collaboration is the key to the future. And with individual forms and needs for individual teams, you're decentralizing all that. There's no, if someone asks a question in their form, the rest of the approval process is seeing that information. And then why do we actually have these approvals? What does this approval mean? Like, I think sometimes we get stuck in like, we need to go to this person and this person, this person. And as a business scales, is that still applicable? Do we actually need that? And what are we actually saying with this approval? Or are we just adding people? So it brings about the conversation of, does this person need to approve or just have visibility? And I need a platform that allows me to do both.
Yeah, I love that. I love the scalability factor of that and asking the question, are we doing approval just for the sake of approval, right? And approval versus availability, that's a big question. I think we'll get to that a little bit later when we talk about scoping and decision-making, things like that. But thank you for that. Anything to add, Rujul, on that? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I was just going to add that like this is Liam's comment earlier about how every year, right, there's someone new that like wants to be part of the flow, whether to Chantal's point, it's eyes on, or they're actually sort of trying to approve something. A lot of this has just changed in the last 10 years because there's more and more stakeholders now. And that just, further compounds the complexity of these approvals and processes up funnel and often not linearly. They sort of get exponentially more complicated as you add more and more.
Yeah,
parties.
I hate it. I got a promotion one time in my old company. And with my promotion, I got, all the packet, and then somebody came in and go, by the way, here's all the additional approvals that you need now responsible for. And I was like, wait a minute, I didn't sign up for that in the job description. And it's like, oh yeah, your Saturday afternoons are now going to be spent reading emails for approvals on things that you didn't know you had. And it almost comes with the job description and the new title, So, so tell me, how big of a problem is this? I mean, the administrative burden associated with requests and approvals, it's a lot of overhead. It's a lot of cycles, right? What's the percentage of time that we spend on administrative, just chasing things down?
Yeah, I mean, so there's a good recent article from Pierre Mitchell, if I remember correctly, from Spend Matters, who talks about this issue. And he estimates from his research that 40% of the time of a procurement or sourcing professional is spent on all of this, almost like all this sort of air traffic controller type work, right? Where you're trying to land all these different planes and manage all this stuff and really just bug a lot of different people and track things and follow up, all of that work. And that's actually really unfortunate, I think, because sourcing and procurement are really two of the highest ROI functions in any organization, and very high leverage, right? But it's just unfortunate that nearly half of time spent is on very tactical things that fundamentally, will not move the needle for the organization. But that's a lot. And for what it's worth, I mean, talking to a lot of procurement leaders too, we see this time and time again. I mean, almost everyone has some flavor of this problem in one way, shape, or form.
Yeah. As you were talking, I was just looking through some of the comments and I was looking through the numbers. It's easy for me to kind of listen to you, but at the same time, look at the feedback on the first poll that we threw out there. And I don't think anybody threw out a 5. I saw a couple 4s, which I'll probably call BS on, but okay, I'll give you a 4. If you're doing a 4, congratulations. It looks like there's about a 2.5 on the average out there. And I'm assuming that that's probably a little generous. One person put we're a 1 out of 5. I don't know if that's a 0.2 or if that's a 1. So if you're 1/5 out of a 1, then you should continue to listen. Even if you're a 1, I'm going to suggest you keep listening. So next question for everybody that's watching right now, 40% administrative time. That's a huge number. Does that sound right to everybody? Tell me, just everybody chime in on the chat. Tell me yes, no, high, low, whatever you want to tell me. I'm really interested to hear whether or not that 40% of what I'll call administrative time is ringing true for all the folks in the audience as well. I'm really interested with that because if you can optimize something that eliminates even half of that and get 20% of your workday back, that's something really amazing. I mean, you're talking about 1 day out of the week, you get full operational status back against a team of 2, 5, 10, 50 people. That's a massive amount of workload. And I know, Liam, we talked about surgeons washing floors, right? And this is where process improvement associated with automation is really key for this.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd even argue, on my side, it's probably even more than 40% for sure, just on admin work. And, it makes me think about, like, I started my career early at Procter & Gamble. And the P&G's got a really robust sort of training program around procurement. And they go through the multitude of skills they want to train you on, whether it be linking, leveraging, negotiation, writing strategy, and none of those skill lists were administrative work, right? And like going gathering approvals as a skill set. And so it's interesting seeing where the industry has gone in that respect.
Yeah, I'm probably the most unorganized human being ever to hold the title of Chief Procurement Officer. And for me, thank God I had some really, really smart and hyper OCD people around me. If I don't hire OCD people, my procurement department would have been dead stop full reverse. So that was my first hiring practice was, okay, if you don't like the color schema of my mugs on my desk, I'll probably hire you because I can't handle just about anything. I think we talked about this early when we were going through the pre-discussion on this. I love to negotiate things and I'll stay on a negotiation all day long. But if you ask me to, organize and prioritize what's happening inside of some of our negotiations right now, I'm like, no, just get me in a room. I'm like the gladiator pitbull guy. I'm the dull blunt instrument. That's what I am. So yeah, I think it's only used. Let's talk about some of the issues that these traditional models create, right? We talked a little bit about rogue spend. We talked about a little bit about lack of documentation, missed savings opportunities, increased risk, right? Definitely slower time because this older model takes time to actually, if you're doing it linear versus in parallel, it takes even longer to do, right? So Chantal, tell me a little bit about what you think some of the issues are with the old model.
Yeah, so from a traditional procurement perspective, not only like the communications, I think we're typically in like email or Slack, right? From an auditing perspective, it's really hard to track like what happened here and to be able to gather data around how long the process is taking, what's happening, to make changes and to make improvements. So with lack of that visibility into reporting, how do we make changes to improve? And then there's also gray areas between teams. Who do I go to for a question about a vendor? Well, if it's about a vendor relationship, is that like procurement? Oh, but legal if it's contracts. So from a user's perspective, it's like, what do I do in this process? And I have no visibility into it. I feel like I submit a request, it kind of goes out into the ether. Sometimes they check in and ask me questions, and then all of a sudden it's like, are we good? I don't know. A PO is issued. What do I do now? There's just that lack of visibility. And I think the future is really like that anyone can submit a request and see where it's at and see what's happening and what to expect. And then using technical systems, like you said, like sourcing teams have become project managers because we're trying to manage the process across multiple systems. And we're just trying to piece it all together to create a better experience for the user, but it's incredibly difficult. And that's where we end up sinking a lot of time, particularly like in companies like Canva, where culture is so important. And we really place a lot of emphasis on that. How do we create that great user experience? But we're forcing our sourcing teams to work in more of a technical system that is not conducive to their skills. And it's also not conducive to a good user experience. Like me as a user, I want to know when I submit a request, what I can expect. And right now, nobody can tell me what's the process it needs to go through and who needs to approve. Well, if it's this and this, it's like, I don't, just tell me what's going to happen. What is going to happen? I don't know.
Yeah.
Go
ahead.
I was just going to say to actually add to that too. I think what compounds the problem is that today for end users, it's an even more infrequent behavior, right? I mean, the average person's really not, putting in that many requests to buy different, material things on an annual basis. And so training and all of these other issues just compound them more and more. So sorry, Mike.
No. That's great point. I also think, one of the things I'll just jump in real quickly is I think rogue spend is a big thing. And I think that rogue spend is a little bit of education, because I think people that come in, we've got a 20% annual turn rate in most, in a lot of companies in the United States right now. But I also think that it's just people look at the process and they're like, hey man, I'm going to buy now and beg for forgiveness later, right? I'm not even going to attempt to navigate the gauntlet of procurement or sourcing team. And I'll spin up an AWS server for my little R&D project and pray that nobody knows it. And if they do, I'll beg for forgiveness later and go, oh, geez, I didn't know there was a portal site that ran me to a process. Or the guy who used to have this desk is dead and buried underneath the desk. And that's why I didn't go through the process, right? I mean, there's a lot about the end user and creating something that's usable, right, Liam? I mean, that's kind of the goal here, right?
Yeah, I mean, I would fully agree with that. And I think if I think about older operating models, like the journey, like for traditional procurement people that came from direct procurement and going into indirect procurement, like from a direct procurement side, you're so used to owning like what it is you're buying, right? And then when you move to indirect, you have to go so far upstream to figure out where it starts. Like, what is marketing doing? What is HR doing? You have to be at that strategy level. And so just creating that funnel where like, hey, I'm doing something, sort of brings it far upstream and changes that model so that you can either engage or not engage and make that choice early on and before it goes down too far downstream. It's a really powerful thing.
I love the idea of going upstream, right? And I talk about this all the time, which is we're so bogged down in the tactical that we don't get to be strategic. And it's obvious if they're spending 40% of our time chasing down the minutia of getting something from request to approval, that's a lot of the reason why we don't have the time at the end of the day to be able to get upskilled, more strategic, spend more time with your chief marketing officer, find out what their needs are, figure out how that you can help optimize their performance. What about the requesters, right? So we talked about the requesters a little bit, and we talked about how it's a daunting task on them. What are you hearing from their sides? I mean, obviously, you two are now you've targeted this as a problem inside of your organizations. You've gone out and you've found a solution in Zip. I mean, and you're in deployment stage associated with that. We're going to talk a little bit about that, but what did you hear when you started your process associated with the actual requesters that are out there, and what's their feeling? I apologize. Why don't we go to Chantal? We'll talk a little bit about your culture. I'd like to hear a little bit about that, because I know you told me a lot about, hey, this has to be a cultural fit for us.
Exactly. And I think that's when we were evaluating different solutions, like that was at top of mind of for something to be successful, adoption is key. And when we're considering adoption and what does that what does our employee base look like and what would be considered successful? What does that platform need to be able to facilitate? And for us, it needs to be easy to use, a low barrier to entry, and it needs to be a single point of intake. So no matter what I need to request, if I'm spending money, it needs to be able to go through the same process and to feel like the same user experience for that user. It's guiding the process on the back end. Like, we can have a multitude of different things happening and integrations, but from their perspective, it's an easy entry point. Therefore, they're going to adopt it. We're going to get more spend under procurement, or at least visibility into spend. So that was a big focus for us as a company of, we need, we're a little bit more from a culture perspective of, we do approvals kind of like, this looks good to me. So this is a stamp, which to everyone else is considered an approval, but it's the way we think about it from a cultural perspective of like, I want to do something, here's what I've identified, provide an easy platform for people to be able to do that and give them the visibility and the autonomy in that to be able to see their process end to end. You shouldn't need to go to a single person to have to like request a new software, right? We want to guide the process. And we also want to guide people when we talk about like culture, we're also talking about things that are important to the company, like sustainability, choosing vendors carefully, could be minority owned businesses, things that are important to us as a company, and guiding that process and informing our end users on a vendor selection, whether it's through like, intelligent forms and things like that, but a marketplace that says, here are our vendor options to solve your problem that we already have. And here's some more information about them to help you make the decision as an employee, what's important to you.
Yeah, that's really special to me. Having a process by which somebody so you've decentralized it, you've put it in the hands of the driving, in the hands of the requester, but educating them in a way to go, hey, we're at 50% against our expectation for minority-owned business spend in this sector. Is there another option for you? Here is an option. Is this viable for you? If so, select it, right?
Exactly.
And Liam, you were talking about a frictionless environment, right? But at the same time, we were talking about some of the big iron systems that we've had in place before, Jira, ServiceNow. I mean, I know in my last operation before I left, in order to put a request in the system and get it approved, you had to log into like 4 different systems. Like, okay, some people use, like the developers use Jira, and usually a lot of IT departments will deploy a Jira. The call center and support desk and customer experience people will use ServiceNow because that's what they're used to doing. And everybody starts to build out their own little workflows that are coming into procurement vis-a-vis an email. It's a nightmare.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely true in my world. And so, for example, like, from a tech perspective, strategic sourcing at the end of the day is enabling the business to move as fast as possible, right? Like, the name of the game isn't necessarily savings for tech companies when it comes to strategic sourcing. It's about how do we make the best bad deal possible sometimes as quickly as possible. And so we definitely want to enable our engineers, enable our product people, enable the business in general just to move as fast as possible because we want to win as a company at the end of the day and make it as frictionless as possible. So in that sense, it's like, I don't really have a need to tell, my security team which system they should use to do the workflow, or that it has to go through my system to kick out, or tell the legal team what their legal queue should look like. And so the nice thing about Zip is that we can just plug in to other people's workflow in sort of one frictionless environment and sort of pull it all in. And then ultimately, the administrative work that becomes a lot of friction for someone like me is because I'm sort of that hub and spoke, people can say, well, Liam, what's the status of this, right? And I'm sort of digging through my emails, and most of the time I'm like, shoot, I never sent this to legal. I should have sent it to legal like 2 weeks ago, right?
I'm working on it. I'm working on it right now.
I'm working on it.
That's the status.
Yeah, exactly. So that sort of automation definitely takes the friction down and makes the business users able to react because they know the status of where everything is at, so they can manage their own expectations. This is going to take longer. It's going to take less time, more time, et cetera, and manage the business appropriately. So it all works out within sort of an automated workflow.
Yep. Yeah. I like that a lot. Now, I mean, listen, we pretty much, we've hammered that point that, the old systems are broken. And and now all of a sudden this wave of new technology comes in, the Zips of the world, some of the other, digitalization softwares that are out there. How do you start if you're in a situation where at least you can admit, okay, I got a broken situation, or the environment that I'm in isn't keeping up with what my need is in a high tech, hyper growth, got to get to market tomorrow strategy. How do you start to evaluate the market, determine what your needs are, and make decisions on that? Liam, how did you start the process?
Yeah, from a tooling perspective, like for me at Hopin, what was most important is because Hopin as a high growth company, the one thing for certain is we weren't going to have a lot of infrastructure on you walking in the door, right? And so infrastructure means a lot of things, but also means like positive the IT team was still building out their capabilities, right? Other teams in terms of the input was going to be low, and so I needed not just a very flexible system, but a vendor that was ultimately going to help me lift and shift things at the end of the day, because I didn't have the resources to do it. And then ultimately, once it's lifted and shifted, something that I could easily maintain at the end of the day. And even sort of at the end of I sort of always think about the world like if sourcing did not exist, or if Liam did not exist, does the finance team or the business have visibility and insight to everything that they need to do in order to make good decisions, right? And so if I didn't exist at the end of the day and we had a system that could at least allow people to raise their hand when they had an engagement that they wanted to do, and then notify everybody to say, do you have opinion or not? That gives everybody the downstream visibility they need, because half the time FP&A is trying to figure out what the business is doing so that they can plan around it. And so by the time it gets to a requisition, they're like, oh, I had no idea that this wasn't in the budget. It's net new spend. What are you doing, right? And so that early sort of system indicators that are way upstream that, honestly, nobody in finance generally knows about, like what strategic sourcing does upstream. And so just even without us having an indicator from a system perspective that says, hey, somebody's doing something, does anybody have an opinion about it? In order for it to carry downstream, for people to capture it correctly, whether it be the contract language, the payment terms, how bad the contract is, how bad the terms are, just knowing it as far advanced as possible was part of the selection process and sort of determination of what kind of tools we wanted to use, versus sort of looking at purely procure to pay tools that were trying to do something upstream in an RFP fashion.
I love that perspective, man. The question of what if Liam doesn't exist? Does this thing continue to operate? That's a strong question, because, and I'll go back to it again, and I hate to keep beating it up, but it's worth doing. You take yourself out of the tactical aspect of it and go, hey, if I can take myself out of the tactical aspect and this engine keeps running, I can get a lot more strategic here. I can start to bring in new areas of spend. I can start to help people reevaluate cost optimization. I can be revenue generation through better financial systems and tax recovery solutions. And I mean, there's a ton of different things procurement and sourcing people can do. Trade working capital improvements with finance and treasury. There's tons of things we could be doing if we weren't chasing emails around trying to get people to be, hey man, where's the legal approval on this thing, right? And I think that's probably the beauty part of what I've seen so far, and I did happen to run through a demo with you on Zip, Rujul, is the ease of use on this thing and this no-code user interface layer that you're kind of layering on top of all of this. Whether you have systems in place or you have, if you have legacy systems in place, you'll hook into them and help just guide things through the process. Or if you don't, it creates its own process on the fly. It's pretty slick, man. I gotta tell you, I see a lot of stuff. It's impressive.
Thanks.
Let me ask you this. You're dealing with a lot of clients right now. You're coming out, you just came out of stealth mode. You're in full launch mode now. The clients that are poised for success on this, do they have some traits that are all familiar? Like you can look at somebody and go, yeah, okay, these people are really ready to optimize and automate their request to approval process. What do those people look like that are going to be successful?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of those, a couple of key characteristics. First of all, I think we see that this pain point really exists even as small as 100 employees or potentially even smaller, and sort of never stops being a problem, right? Regardless of size, all the way up to the behemoths in the world. But really it comes down to is the procurement leader, is the sourcing leader, like, do they actually care about the end user experience? That's like the first thing, because if you do care about the experience deeply in your internal customers, then like even the point Chantal was making earlier around just having many different intakes just adds so much friction that to Liam's point, you're pushing people to loop you in downstream because it's just too much work, or it's too confusing for the end user to try to kick something off earlier because this is not a common behavior for them. They're sort of just doing this like once a year, a couple times a year, a max. So sort of deeply caring about the end user experience is, I think, one vector. The other vector that I think we've found clients who've been successful have is the notion of like, it's not just a process issue, but it's like, and it's not just a technology issue, to be fair. It's kind of like both, right? But you sort of can't, it's a chicken and egg, right? You can't tackle one without the other. And some of the learnings that we've had now, we've actually built into some best practice templates for questions and flows for software and contingent workforce and things like that to just help people get up and running more quickly. But I think that that's another important vector. And if I had to come up with another one, I think it'd be like someone that, a head of procurement that has a perspective and has an opinion on how this should work with other teams, because it's very easy for other teams to sometimes just drive, legal wants this intake and IT wants this intake, and and now you've just got a really forked process and you're just trying to keep your head above water. But it takes someone to sort of deliver a perspective on how this should work, but enable those teams to go work in whatever solutions they love, and with no real change management.
Chantal, you're in soft launch mode right now associated with the automation of your approval to request process. Let me ask you this. Is there a way, in your opinion, to increase your success opportunity on a transformational project like this? Do you start small? Do you start with the geography? Do you start with a specific area of sourcing? What is it?
Yeah, for us, and I think a lot of other companies can relate here, is we have a current process, right? And we kind of need to discard our ideas around how that works currently instead of replicating it in a platform like Zip. Like, let's not build the same thing just in a different platform. Let's think about this in a new progressive way, and really getting all the teams together to collaborate on what do you need and how do you need to work best? What system are you working in? Whether it's IT's in Jira, legal's in Ironclad, what do you need? And really designing, kind of starting over and designing from that fresh perspective of what do we want our user experience to be? Who needs to be involved? And then what value is this providing for each one of those teams? And I think that's really where success lies. And that's where adoption, that's where we'll start with the adoption. And like, it's the hallway test of like, can I give somebody this passing in the hallway? Can they submit a request end to end without having to ask me any questions? Like, that's our yes, we've designed the platform so it's easy to use, but we're also delivering business value to all those teams behind the scenes for what they need to be able to work in their native systems and how they work best as well.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. How about you, Liam? Anything to jump in on that? Anything that you're seeing, any place that you're starting in particular, places where you can fill gaps right away?
Honestly, on the upstream side, right, on that intake portion, where we just want to know is something going on, right? And then anything you can just give heads up to people. It doesn't necessarily have to be all the way downstream to procure to pay, but to the extent that you can just get everybody looped in early, that's a really easy sort of win, especially with the kind of Zip world, where you can easily just say this goes to these 5 different people to let them know something is going on. I think that's an easy win. And if it wasn't there, we'd be doing it manually anyways, via email or via Slack or something of that nature. So it's worth it just for that time alone.
Yeah, I agree. Exposure can be savings. I mean, if I knew about half the stuff that was being bought, I can't tell you how many times somebody's come to me and said, hey, by the way, we just bought some Salesforce.com. And I'm like, we do have a contract for that somewhere. It's like, stop swiping the credit card, man. Just let me know about it, and I can help me help you save some money, please, right? And exposure to that on your side, I completely understand. So it's all just about making sure that you can attempt to funnel some of that in so you get some visibility. Great stuff. I want to nerd out for a second. I want to talk a lot about, lots of companies have built large portfolios of systems that practitioners need to navigate. I told you a little bit, we talked a little bit earlier about, hey, I got to go into Jira. Hey, I got to go into ServiceNow. But layering this no-code UI thing on top creates a simplified process for success, right? Rujul, I mean, this is, hey, listen, we can drop this thing in. We can just start doing lateral parallel processing on lateral approvals. And this is kind of the new wave. This really is Dr. Eloise Epstein from Kearney, right? Everybody knows who she is. She's kind of the, Yoder of our industry, God bless her. And she's been waiting for this kind of UI path to be able to say, okay, listen, I just need all these systems to work for me as a user, right? Is that where we're getting to now with things like Zip and other things like that?
No, I think absolutely, right? I mean, part of this is from all the discussion we've had so far, like all just compounded by all these additional stakeholders. And of course, stakeholders come with systems in many cases, right? And so they've got their own sort of source of truth that they're working on, whether it's a CLM, it's a ticketing solution, GRC solution, so forth. And a lot of this has to just do with, connecting the dots between all these sort of disparate work streams into something that's much more cohesive for the procurement sourcing function, but also for the end user to just have one place to, with as low of a barrier as possible to kick something off. And in truth, like I think what we've seen now work really well is, and we recommend, is for folks to just take a very iterative approach, right? Start with our templates, start with some of the core flows we've already landed. And then, as you learn more, as we all learn more, you can kind of tweak things. And that's actually really important with the no code, because you can actually tweak things. You can just change things on the fly. With obviously the right permissions and auditability and all that, you can. In the past, with a lot of like sort of downstream P2P and some old school systems, right? It's a huge IT undertaking. There's all this time spent, and then it's you want to change, loosen one bolt and screw something else in here, and like you just can't do it because you got to like go raise a whole ticket, and it's this whole big deal. And that entire paradigm is not just shifting, but I would argue has sort of shifted. And is different with Zip. And so we've purposefully tried to take that sort of much more flexible, iterative approach to solving this problem.
Yeah, cool. So just want to do a time check. We got about 10 minutes left. I've been monitoring the chat, lots of chat, not too many questions, which we must be in shock and awe mode. We must be, just melting people's faces off right now, which is always cool. This is really resonating with me. Thank you, Chantal, for telling us about this. I can totally relate to what she's talking about. This is hitting home for me. What's another one? I always find it fascinating how varied the levels of strategic procurement are in topics like this. We get 1s through 5s. That's amazing. Oh my God, I haven't thought about this this way in a while. I would love something like this. So all sorts of feedback coming in. Just we got about 10 minutes left. If you have some questions that you want to talk about, we've got a couple folks right now that are in hypergrowth, high-end technology solutions where they're laying down some really interesting no-code automated workflow and approval processes. If you got questions for them, please feel free to throw them up on the screen. I'm going to jump back in here. I want to go back to the fact, Liam, that you're in a hypergrowth tech firm, right? We talked a little bit, and you mentioned something to us last week when we first met that's resonated with me really strongly. And you said our success ultimately, or my success is ultimately our company's success, because I can't create a hindrance in speed to market. And I think I might be paraphrasing that a little bit, but I apologize if I am. I want to talk a little bit about that. How important is it for you to get this right in a hyper-growth, high-tech firm like yourself?
Yeah, I mean, it's extremely right, because for sourcing people, we know that there's never a shortage of work, right? Every year we're supposed to raise our hand and say, how much savings are we going to do this year above next year, right? And people are like, well, is there really more to do? And we know year after year, there's always more to do. There's always more to get. And if we can't focus there because we're stuck on the administrative side, or we're stuck on the technology side, or the technology doesn't enable us to enable the business, then we're asking for a headcount that we can't get, or we're asking for IT resources we can't get because there's other pressing needs in the business, right? As the company grows, as it gets towards IPO, all the resources get constrained, and sourcing or procurement is always the last team to get money for anything, right? because it's just the function of our job. And so we just don't ask for it sometimes as well. So if you have the ability to go after something one time, it's really important to get it right the first time, because you may not have the chance to do it again, whether it be for money reasons or resource constraints or just other priorities. So extremely, extremely important.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. Yeah, you get one shot to prove yourself. And if you don't do it right, either you're getting shown the door or you're not getting budget for that again, which is shocking to me, because procurement and supply chain management sourcing, we're coin operated as a company, as a department, for the most part, right? I mean, there's a massive ROI in our department, but it all starts with layering something in, make sure that it creates a frictionless addition to value proposition to your company, right? And being able to prove that out and show that, right? Being able to show, hey, listen, I removed 40% of the overhead of my team and restaffed up into strategy, and spent more time with my stakeholders. So I had less rogue spend, which means we had less contracts I had to back out of because somebody signed something they shouldn't have. All of those things that come with spending more time with your customers, which is your stakeholders, right?
Yeah. And I mean, I would even double click on that one step further for the actual users, right? I mean, not all sourcing and procurement people are sort of, built the same way, in the sense that some people are more accommodating than others in terms of like shepherding the process, right? And so you may come to me for a deal and I might be the type of person that says, well, price is too high, let's get a lower price. And I kind of wipe my hands and go away, versus saying, oh, you need to go talk to these other 5 people to get a contract signed. And so from a business user perspective who deals with procurement teams like that, right, or just a different mentality, then it really saves those people a lot of time, administrative time as well, just to try to figure out, hey, I need just to onboard this designer or this freelance blogger just to do something. Why does it take me, 3-4 weeks to get this done? Because now I'm backed up. And so it really does, again, a world without Liem or a world without sourcing really speed up and enable the business on that side as well.
I love that, man. I'm going to use that. I'm going to be like, listen, if you can optimize yourself out of the process, you're doing something right. Congratulations. Go talk to Liam at Hopin. That's what he's trying to do. I think that's super cool. Chantal, question from the audience, coming in off of LinkedIn, by the way. How many current steps do you have in your process or processes? And does this automate all of those steps? So can you give us a sense of the type of workflow process that you're trying to automate here?
Sure, absolutely. So we had previously used a couple different systems to try to facilitate this. I think Jira is probably your most common, right? Of like, oh, you can just throw out some tickets for approvals and things like that. Right now, a majority of what we're trying to facilitate is in Google Forms. Every team has their own kind of like custom Google form. We're about 8 forms at the moment that span across security, privacy, IT for kind of like SSO. We've got like finance, we have a bunch of different forms that we're trying to bring all the teams together, one, to provide them the information for a technical approval, but also we are also leaving out teams right now that want to be involved, but just simply aren't involved in our process. So what we're looking to do and what this is solving for us is we're able to facilitate all of the steps within an approval process. And like Rujul was saying, some of these are happening concurrently or are dependent. So if security and privacy raises a flag that we need to go back and reevaluate this, our approval or our workflow facilitates going back a step and being able to rework that. You don't need to go back to the beginning. You don't need to hold up the process. Other things can still happen and move forward while maybe procurement's, working on a part of the contract and things like that. So we are able to facilitate all of the steps plus more. Now we're able to bring in our FP&A teams. We're able to bring in more layers of approval based on logic. So we're able to use conditional logic there, where as before in Google Sheets, you're submitting a form to a team to approve, and there's no like conditionality on how far does this need to go. It was kind of that inherent knowledge of, oh, if it's above maybe this dollar threshold, then we should probably also have this person approved. All of that inherent knowledge now lives in the system and is automated, so that actually this is probably the true testament of adoption. Our CEO can feel and can trust that the process has worked as expected. So when something gets to him down the line, he knows it has gone through this and he's comfortable with it, instead of going, guys, what happened here? Who approved this? There's a trust in the process so that if it gets to you, you know what's happened.
All right, so great story. Thank you so much. I've got a couple of questions and one comment. Paula from inside the room says, "Come on, this is all too good to be true." Paula, I'm gonna tell you this. I'm sure Chantal would be happy to talk to you offline, somewhere in a private chat inside a Procurement Foundry somewhere. We can set up a clubhouse call if we want to. We can start to walk through this. I'm sure, Rujul, you hear this and it's like, all right, man, this guy's selling me nirvana, right? So just FYI, you got to do your due diligence on this thing, absolutely. But Paula, you might want to give Chantal or Liem a call. I mean, they've seen it. They went to the t-shirt shop and bought the t-shirt, so they're in it to win it. Quick question for you, Rujul. I know Zip connects data between different platforms like Coupa and Ironclad. How are the approvals in those systems handled in the Zip environment? Do the approvals still originate from those systems natively, or do you need to go into Coupa or Ironclad to approve and use their native interfaces for performing these tasks? Whew, that's a lot.
Yeah,
and we got 4 minutes left, bro. So
I can very quickly answer that. With Coupa, I mean, since we're talking about Coupa and Ironclad specifically, I'll give you the example of Ironclad. You know, if legal is approving something in Ironclad, when it hits to the right point in time, we can actually automatically kick off a workflow, the right workflow, whether it's an MSA or DPA or something like that in Ironclad, and then it'll sit at that step in Zip until the status in Ironclad proceeds further, right? So once that contract is ready for signature because it's been approved, presumably by legal, for example, I'm just giving you an example, it'll then kick over to the next step in Zip automatically. Of course, if you have sort of a manual approval, someone's coming in to approve, they can just approve directly through our Slack integration or by coming to Zip. But that's essentially how integrations work. So those teams don't necessarily need to log into our system. They can just keep doing what they're doing in the Ironclads or the Coupas or the Jiras or the ServiceNows of the world. They keep doing their thing, and it'll simply pull the status back into Zip and then push or not push, depending on whatever that status is. Chantal actually can probably speak to it because I think I'll use Ironclad and Jira and a number of these systems. So.
Yeah, and it really depends on the team. Some teams are like, hey, I want to keep my process in my system. Totally fine. Some are like, no, we'd actually prefer just to get a notification and let's come back into the native system, depending on what we're trying to do. And I think something we didn't touch on, but I do want to highlight as a big selling point for us when we were evaluating systems was I want to display only the information to that approver that is necessary for them to approve. I've got over 100 different custom fields. Give me what I need to see for my approval. Let's say it's security privacy. Only show me what's important for me to approve in that approval. Don't show me the whole big long approval, like all of the fields. Show me what I need. Oh. And then that to us was like mind blown. Show them what they need.
Yeah,
and then
don't show them more than what they need, right? I mean, God forbid you send something up to the legal team and you show them everything and all they really need to do is look at 2 clauses. They start reading through all 30 pages and like, wait a minute, we need to park the bus. We need to get back to, let's go to page 1. I'm like, no. I didn't send page 1 to you. Just look at page 7 and 13, please, and let's move along, right? So yeah, everybody's got their opinion, and I won't say the rest of that, but everybody's got their opinion in being able to segment out just the stuff that they need to see, both for security purposes, personal identifiable informational purposes, whatever the case is. Fantastic use point. Thank you so much for that. Listen, we're at 2 minutes left. Let me wrap up with this. There's probably more we can have. I'd love to do a follow-up with you guys somewhere inside of Procurement Foundry in the future. We've got a tools room inside of Procurement Foundry. I'd love to get you 2 inside of there, maybe in 2 or 3 months down the road, see how it's going, and do kind of a recap on where you are post-implementation, where you're up and functioning. One thing I want to know, and I'll start with Liem, and then we'll go to Rujul and end up with Chantal and then Rujul. Out of all of this, is there one takeaway people need to know? What if everybody's standing here today and they just spent 60 minutes with you? What is the one thing associated with automating approval to process that they need to take away right now that they learned from today?
Yeah, I mean, if you strip away sort of the the is this true sort of comment from the chat or whatnot. Like if there were only two automated workflows in the entire sort of system, which is if something came to me and it automatically went to legal and security at the same time, just those two flows alone saves me a tremendous amount of time in and of itself, right? Without having to like go to something like Workato and like build a recipe or go to some other sort of like middleware platform to like move things around, right? That intake alone is and just record it. It saves me a ton of time without all the other bells and whistles around it.
So you don't need to be an API expert is what you're saying to me.
Absolutely.
Cool. Chantal, what about yourself? One takeaway for the audience today.
I think we're all here to be part of the progression and a progressive part of procurement in the future. And we need to think about skate to where the puck is going, right? What do we need to look like in 10 years as, a procurement team, whatever that is for your business? What does that need to look like and what does that need to support? And what do we need to start doing now to be able to support that? And that's the questions we're asking. And I think very similar for other companies.
I think you just sold the entire country of procurement people when you said skate to where the puck's going. We got a lot of people in Procurement Foundry in Canada. I think you might have just sold a lot of software. Rujul, last thought for the audience.
Yeah, no, I think, if I really sort of were to take a step back, close my eyes and wake up in 5 or 10 years, right? Like the trends that have started 5, 10 years ago are certainly going to be much, much stronger around decentralization, around all these sort of Liam's earlier point about more and more stakeholders being part of the process. And it's just important to, try to set up a lot of these processes and just build the right flow early on that's flexible, that then scales. But if there's any further questions or you're more curious, you should check out ziphq.com. You can read more, book a meeting, or just send me an email, Rujul, RUJUL, @ziphq.com.
Yeah, you're going to see a lot more out of Zip. Like I said, they've just become one of our partners in Procurement Foundry. They're sponsoring the next conference that's coming up. The team from Zip, and I highly recommend this, if you go to their booth at the upcoming conference, they are giving away a Peloton at the next booth. So if you go to the show and you're a practitioner and you get the highest amount of gamification points, you might get a Peloton. Do not please sue Procurement Foundry when you fall off it, because I almost killed myself on mine about a week ago. All right, everybody. Thank you so much. Really appreciate your time. Chantal, thank you so much for your efforts today. Liam, amazing input. Thank you so much, man. Really appreciate it. I know how busy you both are. Rujul, great stuff. I absolutely, I know there's going to be a lot of interest from this. And thank you all very much. Really appreciate it from the folks out on LinkedIn. Thanks from the in-house audience. Appreciate it. And great show. Thank you. So much information. Appreciate it. Lots of nuggets.
Thank you all.
Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.